as a second parcel here, and it's not ringing enough for me.
Sure.
Alrighty. Well, let's do this. Welcome, Khan. I want to turn the floor over to Yuko here because I think this is the first time you and I have met. So I want to have you introduced by somebody who knows you really well, and we'll go from there. But welcome.
Oh, okay.
Hi, Khan. So
Sure.
Khan is
Hi.
a great friend of mine who is the director of Antigua and Barbuda Ministry of Culture. He is a former NIU student, NIU graduate assistant for the steel pan program. Khan is the leader, arranger of Hell's Steel Orchestra.
Yeah, the musical director.
Musical director.
Not the leader. The leader is the
Oh, okay. Yeah, thank you for correcting
yeah.
that. You're a performer, teacher, you do all kinds of stuff. So we're so happy to have you with us, and we can't wait to hear what you have to share with us today.
Sure.
Yeah, so maybe, you can first start with, when you started playing the pan, and I mean, you started doing so many things at early age. So yeah, tell us all about that.
So when I first started playing, the intention was not to play. We in Antigua at the grade 6, which is the last level at the primary school, um, you write an exam, and that will determine your placement going into secondary school. Uh, the day of that exam, when we finished the last exam, one of my colleagues played steel pan with Hellsgate. He invited me to the panyard. To be honest, I can't recall knowing much about the steel pan prior to that. But it was something to do. We had nothing else to do. The exam was finished. I was confident that I was going to go to grammar school, which is at the time was one of the leading institutions here in Antigua and still is. So I went to the panyard. I asked my mom if I can go. She said, well, once they're going to bring you back home, because she knows they practice late at night, once they're going to bring you back home, so you don't have to walk home. Because I don't live far from the panyard. I think maybe 5 to 7 minutes walk from the panyard. So it's really not a far distance. But she didn't want me to walk on the road at 12 in the night. Right? I was 11, just about to be 12. So I went to the panyard that night, but I had no intentions of playing. It was just getting out the house. There was nothing else there to do. When I got there, at the time, Hellsgate used to practice in one of the community parks in Antigua, in that village. So they were there on the park in their sections because they were learning new music. I remember one of the members invited me to play, but I was not interested. Then they came back again, you sure you don't want to play? There's something that Hellsgate does, and they still do it even up to today. So once you're around the panyard, especially if you're a young person, they're going to invite you to play, even if you didn't come with that intention. It's something that they do all the time. So most of the people who play with us, who start playing with us, they just came, they saw a lot of young people there having fun, and they're just standing up looking, and we invite them to play. That's one of the things that we do. But I still wasn't interested in playing. I was just listening. And there was a young lady that came to me last, and she's like, you don't have to play for the competition, but you can just come and learn the instrument. And I went, again, not with the intention of playing for the competition, because they were practicing for Panorama. That's what they were doing. Our Panorama is in the summer. It normally happens like towards the end of July. So I went and I was practicing, and I can remember between that first night and the night before the competition, at the time, Hellsgate didn't have any chrome double tennis. I was playing in the double tennis section, and that was back in 2002, by the way. They didn't have any chrome double tennis because they'd lost all of their pans in a hurricane that happened just a few years before, right? So they had to basically rebuild. So they started obviously with painted pans. Single tennis was for some of the first chrome pans that they got back, but they lost everything in 1995 in Lewis. Um, so, the night before the competition, I went to the dentist. I came to practice late. And when I got there, the captain, who's in the double tenor section, was setting up two brand new chrome double tenor fans. So I went into the room for my fan, and he's like, no, this one is yours. And so I played right in front, next to him, for the panorama, that same panorama. And yeah, it was an amazing experience. When I got on the stage, I was extremely nervous that first year. I honestly did not remember playing the panorama tune. I remember when we were done, I asked the captain, who was Stafford Joseph. That's Aisha's father, actually, Hugo. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. I asked him, did I play anything? Because I don't remember anything. The song started and it ended. That's all I remember. So I asked him, yeah. He said, yeah, you played everything. You played everything perfectly. Okay, good. Muscle memory definitely kicked in there because I was not cognizant of what was going on. So I was in shock, really. Well, that is how it started. And I played pretty much for the first 2 or 3 years, just over the summer period, just for the competition. I think sometime in 2004, I started playing a bit more regularly with the band, joining the stateside around that time. And it took off from there in 2006, the early part of 2006. Yes, the early part of 2006. We were invited to the National Youth Pan Orchestra that was headed by a lady named Barbara Mason, who's not a pan player at all. She's never played the instrument, but she has always been an avid lover of the instrument, and she was tasked with sort of reviving the instrument for young people, and she did an amazing job with it, inviting us. So she would go around to the different schools and the different community bands and scout young talent to join this National Youth Pan Orchestra. And I was one of those members. And it's there is where I started learning much more about the instrument, especially from a point of what is happening outside of Antigua and Barbuda. Because at the time, I know pan existed outside of Antigua, but I just wasn't aware of the Len Boogie Sharp, the Ray Holman, the Rudy Two Left Smith, the Cliff Alexis, the Andy Narells of the world. I wasn't aware. I just thought, well, Antigua is where it was, because that's all I knew. And I met that's where I met Gavin Francis, and he started telling me about, you should check out books, because I was playing double second, go and check out Len Boogie Sharp, go and check out Liam T. And that is where, fell in love with them and started doing a lot of transcribing, but not the way that I transcribe now. It was just, listening to them and then trying to play back exactly what they would have played. I spent many, many hours at night, especially Boogie Sharp, just listening to a lot of his music. Anything that I could have found on YouTube at the time, that's what I was playing. Then learning about Liam Teague, and I remember asking one of the guys here, how is it people get, how do you get good at playing? And one guy said, well, with Boogie Sharp, they used to pay him to practice. I don't know how true that is, but that is what they said. They used to pay Len Boogie Sharp to practice, and he used to practice all day. So I said, okay, I need to practice all day as well. But I was going to school. So I'd go to school for like 8 in the morning, and then I'd come back and do my National Youth Pan Orchestra in the afternoon, then Hellgate in the evening. And then from about maybe 9 until 4 or 5 in the morning, the next morning, I would be practicing just outside in the backyard, just practicing. My mom got a little upset after a while because this is early morning and I'm there playing this music. So I started just wrapping my sticks with felt. I removed the rubber completely and just used felt. So you don't hear much. That's how I got through practicing those long 6 to 8 hour days. And I used to play a lot. That's really what it was. Just trying to get there, trying to be not like them, but trying to get to a point where I feel like I've made some sort of progress.
Uh-huh. So were you in school steel bands as well? Because I know there are lots of school steel bands in Antigua. So
yeah, I started, 2006 was an amazing year. That's the year that I also joined the school steel band as well. I joined the school steel band. We entered competition. The same year I joined the National Youth Pan Orchestra. So yes, I was with the community band, playing far more regularly. We should play in the hotels and things like that. Again, with the school steel band, with the National Youth Pan Orchestra. in 2006 is when we traveled to represent Antigua and Barbuda in the OECS. We had an OECS junior panorama competition in 2006, and Antigua won that one. In 2006 as well, we went to Trinidad, and had the opportunity of meeting and speaking with Len Bumdisha, and
Nice.
that's where he shared with me two of my most favorite. Well, it's actually one album, but it's a two-part disc. Phase 2's World Music,
Mhm.
and I still listen to that album even up to today. Yeah, I was actually transcribing a bit of it last week.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well,
And
Con-
eventually, oh,
oh
sorry,
no,
go
no, go
ahead.
ahead, Yuko. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh no, I was just gonna say like so eventually you went to UWE to get your
Mm.
to your undergraduate and then went to NIU for your graduate studies.
Yeah, well, that's a little interesting story. So I don't come from, rich background. So going to university would have been something that I've always dreamt about. I never thought about, going to MIT or going to Harvard or NIU was nowhere in my vocabulary. UE was nowhere in my vocabulary. When I met Barbara Mason, though, there are quite a few things that she taught me. So when we met her in 2006, 2007, playing with the group, she's always, I've always sat down with her and she'll be like, Can I want you to go and perform here? I'll be like, okay, I was just soup. Anybody that wants, well, we say soup. I was just very excited about playing. So somebody will say, I need somebody to play the anthem. I'm there. Just pick me up from my house and I'm good. They want somebody to do a short performance here. I want to do it. So that was it. And she would always sort of say, when you go to these performances, you have to dress nicely, you have to, have manners, you have to. She would even invite me to her home and teach me like simple table manners. She's like, suppose somebody called you to play in England, then you need to be able to hold your knife and fork properly, that kind of stuff. And then she started telling me, you need to get out of Antigua. You need to get out of Antigua. You need to go to university. I was like, I've always dreamt about going to university. Nobody in my family has ever been to university. So it would be, it's a dream. Again, I never thought about being Stanford. I never thought about where it was and what it was going to be because music was not something that I was interested in as a career. And that in itself is a story,
What were you
right?
interested? What were you interested in? Sorry. Well, if you
Um,
had never been, and just so I'm clear, was it Barbara Mason with the National Youth Pan Orchestra?
right,
Right.
that's
So
correct.
let's just
Yeah.
say Barbara Mason had never come into your life. Like you'd have just taken a left turn when she was coming down the hallway, and just you'd never met her. In that moment,
Yeah.
what would have been your dream job? What were you wanting to do?
Accounting.
Wait,
Oh,
shut. All right, podcast over. Accounting. And I say that. I
Yeah,
say that.
yeah,
I know a
yeah.
few. I know a few accountants for whom, when they are in that world, they approach it the same way Bugsy approaches a panorama. Like
Mm,
there's some sort of peace or solace with numbers, and I'm just not that guy.
yeah.
Like so, I'm kind of curious.
Yeah,
Like, how
yeah,
did you go?
yeah. Um,
That's
I'm
interesting.
actually very good with numbers, like extremely good with numbers. I mean, I always loved maths in
Mm,
school. When it got to like algebra and all of those higher learning stuff, I kind of got a bit hazy for me. But in terms of just numbers, addition, subtraction, multiplication, seeing numbers, remembering numbers, just dissecting things like that, I'm very good at that, and I've always been very good at that. I mean, I've always been prior to music. 2008, 2009, going to university. I was always an academic student, so passing the top in my zone, top in the school, that kind of thing.
mm,
When I went to grammar school, I got a slightly different appreciation. But in terms of careers, I wanted to be a police officer initially when I was much younger, and that's because my dad was a police, right? So I sort of looked up to him. He is a musician as well, and he's always been. He plays saxophone, plays guitar, plays bass. So he actually tried to teach me music when I was really young, and I just was not interested.
mm.
The only time I really started learning music and playing instruments is when I started to play pan back in 2002 when I was 11, just about going to be 12. After going to grammar school, I found this love for accounting. And I think it had to do, at the time, my mom kept saying, I want you to go and work in the bank because she has this thing where once you work in a bank, you'll be fine. These bankers tend to do well, and
Mhm.
so she wanted me to work in a bank. And I just loved numbers. I loved accounting. I mean, I didn't want to get into physics and that kind of stuff. Though I did physics, in secondary school. So I went to state college. All this time again, I'm playing piano. I'm learning about all of these external forces, the Bukti Sharps, I didn't know Otello Molina at the time, but Andy Narrell was a big one as well. And around that same time, Andy Narrell came to Antigua, and Bukti Sharp came to Antigua as well for Muzafan. So I was able to hear them play and be like, yo, yeah, this is it. So starting to learn, one of the things I loved with my band, Hell's Gate, when we went to these gigs, I was able to sort of, do these cadenzas in between and before songs. They would allow me to do that. So I started loving it. I was at State College, which is a tertiary level institution here. It's like a sixth form. US uses a different system.
Yeah.
But I was 17, 18, and I'm in this class, this accounting class with 90 something people, right? And that's just one of two classes at that institution. And there are multiple institutions that are learning accounting at that level in Antigua. And I looked around the room and I said, man, I'm going to have to compete with all of these people for a job. You know what? Let me start focusing on music. And then that's when I started, looking more at the music side. Barbara Mason then said, you need to get out of Antigua. So I was originally supposed to go to FMU, Florida Memorial.
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
We started conversations with Don Batson.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So the idea was for me to do my first degree. Well, I had no intentions of doing my second degree. It was just going to university was a dream. So, we started having conversations about FMU. So it was going well. And then I think Miss Batson got pregnant and went on maternity leave. So the entire conversation broke down. So, we're looking at UE as an option. The UE came through, the government was willing to pay for me to go to university. So I was actually the first student here in Antigua to get a scholarship for PAM to study music here. And since then, many others would have gone and are still going today. I went to UE, and what's funny, again, remember I said I don't know anything about NIU. I have no clue what NIU is at that point in time. I met Dr. Ann Osborne.
Okay.
And this is in my first year. She taught us a class. What was the name of that class, boy? Oral training. Oral training 1 and 2. And she's like, when she first met me, she said, Cant, you have very good ears. You have very good ears. And then, we go to classes like, Cant, you're very, very good. You're very different. I think you need to consider going to NIU. I did not know what NIU was, so I just didn't even bother with what you were saying. I was like, I'm living my dream right now. I am at university. So, I'm fine. The world can come to an end right now. I'm good. I've gotten to university. The grass is actually green, like in the pictures. I'm happy. Right? I'm enjoying myself. And then, what's funny, who really pushed the NIU narrative was really Dr. Remy.
Yeah.
Right. And even then, some strange things have happened in my life. Right. Because meeting Dr. Remy was a mistake. It really was a mistake. It was a mistake. And I'll tell you why. So when we went you have to sign up to do individual lessons with an instructor. Right. When we got to the school, the orientation that we had was with a Caucasian lady. Right. And it was actually Miss Ramla. I don't know if you know Miss Ramla. She's at UE, but she's a Caucasian. What's her first name? Kelly Ramla.
Okay,
fine. But so she's the one that gave us the orientation. So it's like, this lady's really nice, very pleasant. I think I want to be my instructor. So we go to the sign up board, and when you get to the sign up board, you have all of the names of the instructors. And I could not remember her name. All I remember it started with an R. That's all I remember. So I'm looking at the list and I'm saying, Ramlal sounds like an Indian name, so it can't be this. And then there are other more common Afro-Caribbean names. So I was like, no, these aren't what I'm looking for. I'm looking for a Caucasian lady. and I saw Remy. I said, this looks like it. So I signed up for this class. So I go to my first session and I walked inside and I'm looking at her. She's looking at me. I'm like, I don't think I'm in the right space. She's like, really? Who are you looking for? I said, were you here for the orientation? She's like, no, I just came back yesterday or something like that. I was like, okay, I'm sorry. I think I'm in the wrong class. She's like, you know what? It's okay. I don't know you, but play. And if you're good, I'll keep you. If you're not good, I'll pass you off to the next teacher. So then I played. I don't remember what I played. It was just something random. And she's like, I'm definitely going to keep you. And that's how I ended up with Dr. Remy. And Dr. Remy has really pushed me through that entire 3 years and really groomed me for NIU. She's the one that every semester, you need to go to NIU. In my second year, I need to introduce you to Cliff. I need to introduce you to Cliff. But she knows about NIU. I couldn't have any clue what NIU. And then Yuko and Cliff came to my recital. That I didn't get any credit for, by the way, because it's not something that the school did. At UWI, you do a thesis for your final submission as opposed to a thesis, as opposed to a recital. But what she said, there's something that they wanted to start. So they sort of used myself and my colleague who was with me, Mikkel, as the guinea pigs. We still had to do our recital, our 10,000 word thesis. We still had to do our 10,000 word thesis. But, I must say, Dr. Remy would have pushed me immensely throughout that 3 years, exposing me to a lot of things. And certainly, that's how I found NIU. And I'm so happy.
Well, Con, can I ask you, like, I'm just, everything you're saying to me is like, I feel like we need to take these last 5 minutes of what you just said and like put it out as like a tutorial for students and teachers, because everything you're saying to me is like you were a student who was just constantly curious, like, trusting, but curious. Like, you couldn't remember the name, so you didn't just give up. You were like, I'll go here. And then when that person was like, I don't know who you are, you're like, okay, I'll stay. Like, but as a teacher, Janine Remy also, or Dr. Right? Dr. Janine Remy?
Yeah, Dr. Remy. Yeah.
Dr. Remy didn't just turn you, like, there's like sliding door moments that happen all along the way. If you'd have just decided to be like, I can't remember that person's name, I'll go do something else. Like, all these little decisions, like, don't seem like big ones in the moment. But when you look back, it's like you would not have met Yuko if Dr. Remy had been like, you're not in my class.
That's for sure.
I'm not saying you'd be in the gutter and would be homeless or anything crazy, but like, just, it's so wild to me that all of this stuff you're saying are just little moments of like human interaction, that like a woman sitting down with you and showing you which knife to use. Like, that's like, you could have been like, I don't care about that. That's not important. You were just like, well, this may be something I'll need. And you like, anyway. But my main question is, like, once you started experiencing Pan outside of Antigua and Barbuda, like, what were some of the things that were sort of like, oh, whoa, that's different than what I, like, for me, when I went to Trinidad the first time, it was hearing cool down versions of panoramas, like hearing Phase 2 play a slow version, and being like, cool, that's the tune, and then you hear them play it fast, and not being able to know that they were playing it slow, like, because no one played it slow, they played it as if they were playing it fast but slow. Like, and that's a thing that in U.S. bands, in my experience, and I would say that goes for orchestras, like, or chamber music groups, so percussion is this way, like, we have a hard time playing things slowly, but with this sort of like no bullshit
energy.
Yeah, but that's just my experience. But like, for you, what were some of the differences when you got out of Antigua that you're like, oh wow, that's a bit different than I thought? And it could be an approach, it could be in programming or whatever.
Well, if I can start with closer to home, so I'll start with Trinidad. Pan at the time, it was growing in Antigua again. So back in the 70s, steel pan and calypso was the highlight of carnival. Sometime between the middle of the 80s into the 90s, it didn't go dormant, but it was dying for many reasons. So I won't get into that. So it started to rebuild in the latter part of the 90s into the 2000s. When we started playing, young people weren't as prevalent as they are now in the steel band, because it was rebuilding. So there are far more steel pan what they call them, school of fans. That's what we call them here. That are attached to the community groups. They're far more now than they were 15 years ago. I went to Trinidad, and it was just amazing seeing how some of the more established bands were set up like businesses as opposed to just somewhere people go and play steel bands. So like, if you know where UB is, you come out of UB, St. Augustine, and literally just across the road there's Exodus in Tunapuna, and you pass it like, wow, damn, like this is something. That was an experience for me. And it's much more than just you just coming and playing an instrument or preparing for panorama. But it was just year-round business, it's year-round culture, a way of life that they offered, and this level of professionalism that they carried out. Bands like Exodus, All Stars, when you see them, there's something very different than what I'm accustomed to. Another thing that was an eye opener. No, me going to UB, I always could have read music because I was a part of choirs when I was younger. So I could have sight sang, but I couldn't sight read on my instrument. It's not something that we practiced a lot here. So when I got to UWI, seeing people reading, I signed up for this class with Jessel Murray. What's the name of the class? It is UWI Steel. It's the highest steel ensemble. And I signed up in my first year because Dr. Remy said I should sign up. I went into the class and they put the music in front of us and everybody's playing. And I'm like, wow, yeah, this is not for me. So that was, to see them just play, that was an eye-opening experience because that's not something that we do here. Most of what we do is via road. So, going there, Dr. Jessel Murray, I don't think he's a doctor, but Mr. Murray at the time, he's like, it's up to you if you want to stay, but you do realize you'd have a lot of work to do. And I felt very intimidated, to be honest, because it's not something I'm accustomed to. So I told him, here's what, I'll work on it for a year and then, I will come try again next year. Only to find out that a lot of the people that were in the group before, and they've played some of the songs before. So it was much easier, but I was intimidated. So, I tried. I really spent a lot of time that year just sight reading. I even tricked Dr. Remy. Don't tell her I say this. Hopefully she don't listen to this recording here. I tricked Dr. Remy a lot of times. So what would happen is, because I wasn't confident with my sight reading at all, what I would do, she would give me these pieces, 3, 4, 5-page pieces, because she would give me like grade 6, grade 7, grade 8 pieces to play. And instead of going home, she says, if you go and work on the first page, work on these areas, I would go and I learn the entire piece, right? So we have class Tuesday this week, Tuesday next week I come, the entire piece I've already learned the piece. So she's like, man, you learn these pieces fast, and I'm like, yeah. The reason I was doing that, I didn't want her to ask me to read the next section.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. So I learned them off so she wouldn't say, hey, what? Try and sight read this section and try to, nah, I learned everything. But I spent a lot of time, sight reading in Trinidad. I used to practice sight reading like often, regular, speaking to Keon, and he was giving me pointers. It's like before you go and actually practice your piece, just find something separate, a separate piece, and just work on it. But don't try to memorize it. Try reading it. Start very simple and just build. So I spent some time doing that. So that was an eye-opening experience for me. Going to the US. I mean, there's some other things, but going to the US now, like stepping into NIU, and you just see everybody just doing amazing things. And also, I think one of the things that I've admired most about my experience at NIU was how open everybody was to share. That's something that when I was at NIU, I didn't feel like I had to compete with anybody. I didn't feel like anybody was trying to compete with me. It was just like, we're all doing this. Guys would call, and I played for everybody. Well, you could know. I'd be like on every recital when I was at NIU. At 2 o'clock in the morning, Cant, what are you doing? Well, I'm just here. Let's go to the music room and practice. that kind of atmosphere I just absolutely admired. But it was just mind blowing for me, that people can sit in a space and just function together and just share freely and give advice, that kind of thing. And I'm telling you this, that more than anything else, going into the NIU Steel Band room for the first time, seeing everybody in the room and just playing and enjoying the music. Liam's approach towards running rehearsals definitely has left an indelible mark on me. That to be able to accomplish so much in such a short space of time. It's like what, 50 minutes? What?
Yeah, 50
How long
minutes.
was? Yeah.
Yeah, 50.
To accomplish all of that in such a short space of time, that as well as an eye-opening experience. When I started traveling, being guest performer at some of the schools, going to these schools and seeing all these young people at 13, 14, playing steel pan music with their scores. I mean, yes, they would have recited it before, but they're playing and just love the instrument, just being appreciative of it. I mean, sometimes I find that they are more appreciative than we here in the Caribbean of this instrument and what the instrument can do and the possibilities. I find a lot of times that they are always the ones that, can we try this, can we try that? Just very inquisitive about what the possibility can be, what are some of the things that they can do with the instrument. So it's always amazing, seeing how the different cultures, I think here in Antigua and in the Caribbean, it comes second nature in most cases. So it's like, it's steel pan. But when you go to these places, like, wow, it's an instrument, it's a musical instrument, and it can be compared. I mean, in some cases, some persons may love the steel pan more than they love another instrument, just because of how novel it is, obviously. But those are some of the things that, for me, that have been like wow moments, some highlights for me.
I'm curious, in my experience, like if So Percussion gets asked to go do a master class or be in residence and work with percussion chamber music, which is more in my training. Your job in that moment, like when you come to the University of Akron or you're a guest artist at some other school, like your job isn't, you sometimes don't have the time to drill down deep necessarily. Like you have to fix the problems that are the most fixable in that moment. And then you leave and you're like, okay, cool. That was successful, man. I think if they just had this one other thing, they could take it to the next level. Like what, and Yuko's been sort of helping me think more about like things like, maybe not even playing, but just like the way people talk about the instrument. When people say steel pan sticks versus mallets or steel drums versus steel pan, I know that lexicon in the United States is fast and loose. And I'm curious if just like maybe just lexicon isn't the only thing, but like what are some things that US based bands who do not have a foundation in a culture or cultural foundation like NIU does, and even I would say the University of Akron has constantly been bringing in people from Trinidad, and so there's at least seeds planted. But I think the most bands in the United States in particular, and I'm just focusing on them right now, just don't have any experience working with anybody from the culture. And I'm curious, like, and there's no value judgment there. Like if you're in Texas, sometimes you just don't run across a lot of Caribbean folks in the middle of Texas. Like that's okay. What are some things that U.S. bands could be thinking about that maybe are like, in your opinion, would be like, yeah, just think about these other couple things, and the thing would grow a lot quicker than it is
now? So steel pan is an instrument, but it's also a culture. This is a conversation that we've actually had. Some of us, myself, Andrew White, some of the other younger persons. It's so. I mean, yes, we understand that. So you mentioned the term mallet versus the handspring, right? What I think it's all a part of that experience that you get from the panyard. It's a part of what I would refer to as the glossary of steel pan terms, right? It just makes the instrument what it is, right? A lot of these is like we have this battle here in Antigua where there's classically trained musicians have a hard time understanding the double tenor. But when you think about tenor, you think about a certain range.
Yeah, me too, bro. I've played double tenor a few times, and I still cannot get my head wrapped around it.
Yeah, and then when you say guitar and that kind of stuff. But, I mean, it's just all a part of that culture, a part of that history. I mean, that history that still is less than 100 years old, mind you. So it's still developing. There's still so much to go, but it would have moved so fast in that short space of time. One of the other things that I think maybe with some more involvement is that feel. I don't know if that's what you were trying to say, but what I get from some of the bands, it's always interesting to hear, two, three different groups play the same song and it feels totally different,
Yeah.
right? It's just again all a part of that culture, that feel culture, I guess, more to use that term. But I think just generally what I've seen in the bands that I've been around, I mean, I've been to Texas, a few places in Texas with the steel bands. Well, I've been to Akron as well. I've been to, I've seen a steel band in London. I've seen Philadelphia. Oh, I've been to Delaware, right, as well. I've been to some of the church steel band groups, like in the New York Bronx area, and I think just mostly just has more to do with appreciating the culture for what it is. Yes, a mallet. When you think about percussion instruments, mallets seem to be the international term. You would never hear anybody refer to the brake drum as the brake drum here in Antigua. Like, what in the world? This brake drum is like this international term that nobody really. But in our culture, it is the iron, or some people refer to it as the steel. Right? In Antigua, I can't speak so much for Trinidad, but in Antigua, before the steel band was the iron band. That was the name of our groups, and they still exist today. Made up of a variety of iron instruments, or a variety of brake drums of different sizes, playing different rhythms and that kind of stuff. So those are the kind of things I think is more from a cultural point of view. The culture of the instrument, where that we probably need to work on. Just appreciate the instrument for what it is, right? Or appreciate the culture for what it is. But it may not be an issue for most people, and it's not really an issue for me. But if we're pointing out anything that would be what it is.
No, it's really. I'm glad that those are things like to me, the feel is always the most obvious thing, and that's something that like it's hard. I've been around enough Caribbean folks playing pan that I know I know when it feels good and when it doesn't, but I don't always know how to talk to a band to make it feel good. And I'm starting to learn that the engine room has almost everything to do with it, the feel that the drummer and the combination of the engine room has, but then that radiates up through the rest of the band. But something you mentioned earlier about your own insecurities getting into, like when we talk about culture, rote teaching is part of the culture, and that's been the hardest thing for me to get involved in my teaching in a classical setting where I only have Matt Dudek gave me a little bit of shit the last time we talked about. He's like, you got plenty of time to teach by rote if you're good at it. And I was like, yeah, I know that, but in 50 minutes, you may get through the verse and chorus of a tune. If you have the chart, you can read through many more. Now, I understand that. I understand as a teacher why I have sheet music in front. But culturally, I think the bands also sound the way they do because when Boogsy's teaching music to you, he's going black out that he's singing out pitches and he's scatting stuff to you, and then people play exactly what he said. There's a reason triplets in Trinidad don't sound like ba 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 ba. It's ba 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 ba. There's a little lilt to it. That's important to me, and you don't get that on sheet music. On the other hand, it's like also sheet music is how Boogsy's music gets played by other bands in Washington State. So like I don't have a good question here, but like I guess my question is, how do we balance that as educators in classical settings where most of the students are playing like marimba solos and they have a chart and they're not being taught a marimba solo by rote. And then, I think if I were to come and play in Hell's Gate and you were teaching me the tune by rote, you'd probably stick me in the back because I'm really slow at rote learning. Like, and that's just the truth, but I don't have practice at it. So how do you deal with that as an educator?
Well, that is for us here in the Caribbean, that comes as second nature. That's what we do, right? Yeah. As an educator, I've actually had the best of both worlds, even here in Antigua, where I have the ability to teach. Well, you're running your sessions using scores, but also rote learning. What I've been doing, even when I was at NIU, we used to do the University Steel Band, which is a steel band that has
beginning university students.
Yeah, maybe music majors that never play the instrument. Yeah. There are also some students from was a part of the university that never played instrument at all.
It sounds very
What we
similar
try
to
to
the
do
way
is,
Princeton steel. Kendall Williams teaches a steel band at Princeton with me, and it's all non-musicians who are like
right.
nuclear science majors and whatever. And they, so
Wow.
teaching them is a different thing
Yeah,
than teaching the NYU band.
yeah. So with that now, what happens? We always try to make it a part of those sessions. So um, yes, we want to use the scores, and we have to use the scores because they also don't retain the information the way that we would because we are accustomed
Mm,
to learn via rote. But what we do, we'd find simple songs, Tilly, Old Lady Walk a Mile, those simple
Mhm.
songs, and use those simple songs to have them experience that rote learning
mm,
environment.
Yeah.
Or what I always suggest is if you can, assisted rote learning. So, it's always good to be very vocal, like when you're teaching. So there may be a phrase here that they're on the score, and you just don't think that they're bringing that out the way that you want it to sound.
mhm,
Then you start singing it for them. In all of my groups, it's always I will sing for you, and you have to sing it back for me
mm.
because I strongly believe in that connection between the ear and obviously what you hear in your head. So all of my panorama tunes, everybody in the band would be able to sing their entire part from start to finish, right? And it's not just because I want them to sing a song, no. But I mean, how do you play something effectively if you don't know what it sounds like? And you have to know what it sounds like.
Speaking
So
my
in order for
language
you to
right
know
now,
what it
Con.
sounds
You're speaking my language. I was just telling Yuko before we logged on that my entire semester at NYU was remote, online,
like,
and so none of them had access to drums. So I would send them a click track with their part in their ear, and they would have to sing their part and send me the recording of them singing, and then I would layer out. I'll send it to you, and you please do not share it publicly. You can laugh at it and then put it in the trash. But it was
yeah,
them, like they had to sing their parts, and when you layer it
yeah,
up, it sounds like an entire panorama being sung. Now I don't ever want to
right.
do that again on that level, like every week of an entire semester. But your point is reaffirming the thing I feel like I want to take from it, which is the singing. Like the students may
Yeah.
not know where C sharp is on the guitar pan, but they know
Mm,
in their head that they're supposed to be singing a C sharp, and that is
right,
an
right,
important step in that
right.
process.
Right. So one of the issues that we normally come across with that is like, there are people, but sir, I can't sing, Mr.
Yeah.
Can, I can't sing, but the idea is not for you to sound like Alicia Keys or Mariah Carey. I didn't want to call her name, but I'm going to call him, or like Mariah Carey or
Yeah.
Beyonce. That's not the idea. It's just you need to get an appreciation for the sound, and that's where when you're talking about feel, that's where it comes from.
Hmm.
You have to really understand that sound. I mean, even when you're improvising, I improvise. My sound improvising now is much more different than it was 10 years ago, and it just has something to do with the type of music that I've been listening to, the type of music I've been trying to internalize, and then in turn, I sing a lot of things. I sing everything, right? So that is really what it is. And I think that, I mean, from a teaching point of view, it can help. I mean, with short sessions, I mean, it doesn't leave a lot of room for, hey, let us try to do this entire piece by rote. And I understand that because most of the steel bands would practice 4, 5, 6 hours, in the evening, so they would have time. I mean, in my view, sometimes they waste a lot of time too, right? Don't say that I say, but at times, but I can understand
I'll
why.
I'll say it,
Um,
Con, and they can be mad at me. Like and it's never my place to say that. Like if I'm drilling a steel band, I'm never going to be like, "Hey, we're wasting time here." But the
mm,
rote teaching method there's built into it is chaos, like
mm,
in the way that like sheet music is not. And by the time somebody gets it at the end, they've learned it wrong, and it takes it anyway. Like that's chaotic,
mm.
and
Right.
that can
So
take time.
now, what I can tell you, so I use a method. I didn't learn it anywhere. I don't know if maybe other people use it. When I became the arranger of Hell's Gate in 2009, I made it. Uh, I made a pledge to myself that I needed to change the way we teach music.
Mm,
Still via rote, but I needed to change the efficiency of passing music on to the players.
mhm,
Now, I remember my experiences, we were practicing until 4 o'clock in the morning after coming practice at 7 o'clock in the night religiously.
mhm,
And what tends to happen is that as people get older, they start dropping off because they have responsibilities, or people just saying it's just too much time. They just can't manage. And I thought that we needed to find a way to strike that balance. Somewhere around 2010, 2011, I started developing, well, the way that I teach now, especially to large ensembles. So it's not I teach the second section leader teaches person, this person teaches person. No, that is not how we do it anymore. I teach via sections. So it is we've moved from practicing 6 hours a night, 7 hours a night to practicing for pretty much most of the season for like an hour and a half, 2 hours maximum, and still complete the panorama tune before all of the bands here in Antigua and Barbuda, right? Set, certain timelines. So I'd say, by a month in, by 3 weeks in, I want to be at 3 minutes. And then, because usually after you get past that verse and chorus first arrangement, then music tends to pick up very fast because everybody's now, they're marinated in the music. They're now ready, so it's easy to move forward. And then you also find when you get to the jam and those kind of sections, they tend to be longer. So they eat up some time. But what we've been doing is, so I would go all of the sections that are playing the same thing rhythmically. I do them together. So, like Hell's Gate only has 6 sections: single tenor, double second, double guitar, cello, bass. That is
Okay.
the makeup of the band. That's how the former captain wanted it, who is also the pan builder. He just thought that was the best, for him. So if I'm teaching like the flat tune, I would say, okay, we're going to do the entire flat tune. I take 20 minutes, 30 minutes, sing it in a double section, double second, and I will call the notes. I'll sing the phrases. Everybody plays it together. We move on a bit more, and we're able to get so much done. I mean, it's something that you really should experience.
Yeah.
A guy said I should write a paper on it one of these times, but
I
what I
think you
found
should.
is that I got away from exactly what you were saying. By the time it gets to the last person, everybody's playing something different, and to be honest, that method has also afforded me the opportunity of having majority of my band in the panyard at the same time,
Mm.
because nobody wants to learn from the next person. They want to hear it directly
Yeah.
from me, so they make sure that they're there to learn the music when I'm teaching music. So it has worked for us here. As I said, I mean, um, I always believed, rather than having 2 hour, 3 hour breaks, the people just walking in alignment. Here's what: let's get in, do what we need to do. 2 hours, I believe, is a good time. We do our 2 hour practice. Those who want to stay back in Lime and drink and party, that's up to them. Those who want to go home, they get to go home. The parents who are going to pick up their kids, they don't have to pick them up at 2 o'clock anymore. They come and pick them up at 9:30, and everybody wins. And I said it's been working for us.
Well,
I can't speak for all of the bands,
I
but it
bring
has
it.
been working.
I mean, I bring up the rote stuff mainly as it's an insecurity of mine. Like I know how hard it was for me when I went to Trinidad the first time and there was a guy named Almond St. Rose who's a seconds player with Faze, and he just was yelling at me and he kept calling me a computer. He's like, put it in your computer, and that's what he kept saying. And I did a one-handed roll at one point. He's like, knock off that Norel shit, and he's like screaming at me like, and it was like, I'm 19 years old. I have no idea what anything is. I saw Andy Norel do it once. I was like, okay, cool, and he like slapped the sticks out of my hands, but it changed my life. Like that was an experience I never had. But I worry that because there's no real method jotted down. Like everything you laid out to me is a method, and you need to write that. Somebody needs to write that book, because I think the Cleveland Orchestra, I think the New York Phil should teach one tune by rote every year. I mean, I
Yeah,
think Beethoven 7 would sound completely different if they learned it by rote.
right.
Like, and the only reason they don't is because there's a union clock and we have a score. That's silly. But like,
Right.
if in 200 years, ensembles, including chamber music groups, including string quartets, it doesn't matter. It just feels like, I mean, I want that method book. So as soon as you write it, I will buy it, and
Yeah,
All
I'll
right.
buy
your first customer.
it.
Because I think it'll change. I think that when you talk, the culture thing has always been the hardest thing for me. And it's like I can talk to them about food. I can tell them how awesome roti is. I can tell them about the accent and how you'll be in conversations where you don't understand anything anybody's saying, but they're speaking English. Like all of those things are important cultural things, but the way the music is actually handed to the players
Mm.
is something that I think just by default isn't able to happen much, because culturally I come from the middle of a cornfield where a score was handed to me. I learned both of them,
Mm.
that tune from a score. I had to write in all my note
Yeah.
names, and I had no. I just was like, it was the same thing to me as a Bach cello suite. I was just like, well, I don't know
Right,
how to
right.
read Bach cello suite either. I guess I'll, I'll just do this.
Yeah.
But I
Yeah,
think
I think,
it's important.
if you learn, like for us who learned, via rote initially and then learned how to sight read afterwards, uh, I really think that we get the best of both worlds. So, like, because we retain so easily, I remember, like, when you go to these, like, guest perform at these schools, most of them have a feature panorama tune that they would do.
Right.
And all I just need to do is just listen to that on the plane. And when I get there, I play the entire tune. I'll have the score to guide the notes, but you already have all the phrases and everything inside your head. You remember what it sounds like, so it's just so easy to see the score and and play. So as I always say that being able to be proficient at rote learning, certainly helps. It certainly helps. But I mean, I don't think one is better than the other. What I would definitely promote is that having the ability to do both, and to do both well, is something that it should be encouraged.
I
I
think
think, just as you're saying, I think everybody needs to have some sort of experience with rote learning.
Well, and I think my experience, I learned how to read music before I learned how to listen to it. And I would say that my ability to sight read, I think if you put a panorama in front of me, I can sight read it on not on lead, on double seconds. I could
Yeah,
sight
yeah,
read
yeah.
any panorama you put in front of me.
Hmm.
But that doesn't support my rote learning skill set. Like I
Hmm.
think the would if I was steeped in the rote learning and could also sight read a panorama. It's like the other reinforces the other, not the other way
Right,
around.
right.
Like being able to read music doesn't mean you can just listen to something and play it. You have to
Right.
learn how to do that. And I think anyway. I think every classical percussionist or every musician should have to spend 1 year in your band in Hell's Gate and
Hmm.
just learn a tune by rote, and then they can go on to do whatever it is they wanted to do. But just have that experience, and they'll be better off.
Our doors are open.
Well, Yuko, Khan, we've taken 51 minutes of your life here, and I want to be respectful of the rest of your time here. Yuko, do you have any specific questions for Khan as we're coming down the home stretch here?
Sure. Yeah. So, Kang, what would you say are positive and unique part about Pan in Antigua? And as a director, like what are the challenges that you face, and how do you try to make seek solution for those challenges?
That's a hard question.
I know.
Um, so you asked, the first part of it asking
Like
about,
what's unique, what's positive about
um,
yeah, Pan in
okay,
Antigua.
let's deal with that first. So what is one of the good things that is still happening is the interest by the young people.
Yeah,
Um,
excellent.
so with that, I mean, when you have young people interested, I mean, again, there are people right now. I know Aisha is at school.
Yep.
Well, Zara and
Ariel.
Ariel just finished at UWE. There's Robert Simmons, Jawan Henry, um, what's the name? Oh gosh, there are about 4 or 5 of them at UWE.
Wow.
Yeah, then I know a whole bunch that are trying to get in as well. Um, so it, it we I think that we're heading in the right direction. Antigua is very small. Antigua has just about 100,000, less than 100,000 people. So you're having all these young people that are interested not just in music but in furthering the art form, and all of them have this different perspective, not different perspective, sorry, but a different focus. Some want to work on here. Aisha is very interested in the pan building,
Building,
tuning.
tuning. Yeah.
Um, Jawan, whose father is a pan builder, that's Veron Henry. Jawan is actually more interested in improvising and performing.
Yeah.
Dimitri is very interested in writing, composing for the instrument. So, there's just all of these people are in different places and things. Robert Simmons,
Yeah.
very interested in the management of steel bands, from a practical point of view, not so much, in terms of accounting and things like that, but in terms of just managing and teaching and that kind of stuff. So they all having young people that are very interested there. That's, I think, is an amazing start. Um, Outside of that, what we'd have seen is that more and more steel bands are now trying to, because what we've been pushing, myself, I consider I'm one of the persons that would have started with this mindset. But what we're trying to push is we're trying to get away from the the unnecessary rivalry, which has sort of hampered the development.
Yeah.
So trust me, when it comes to competition, I love panorama, right?
Mhm.
I love panorama. I love yeah, we're gonna win this one, we're gonna take this one, just for fun, just for kicks, right? I'll be like,
Yeah.
but outside of the competition, I think that we need to find a way to be a bit more connected. So what we've been doing is you're finding more and more steel band events happening. Prior to COVID, there are like six, seven, eight. Hell's Gate alone is putting on four. Panache is putting on quite a few. Halcyon is putting on. Gemini is putting on. So that is much more than you would have seen even 10 years ago. All right. So, seeing that, seeing that growth is something that we can always be thankful for. It's one of those positives coming out. Um, what some of the issues that I'm having though, generally is and not just from culture, the director, but just in the steel band fraternity. I don't think that between our association and some of the older minds in the art form, I don't think that much is being done to try to take the art form and the people within it to the next level.
Okay.
The individually, there's some people doing some things, but I mean, our association really only operates during the carnival season to argue with the government for money. At least that's what I see. I've seen areas where they try to boycott the competition a month or 2 weeks before the competition. At that point in time, all of these young people, all of these forces would already been in play. And at that point is when you want to call. I think we have to think much bigger. I'd love to see much more camaraderie in putting on not just events but programs on a national level. And this is between me as a pan player and now me as the director of culture, because I do have people within my ministry that are supposed to deal with that, and I'm not confident that that is being done. Right? Because I can't just focus on pan alone, because there's so many. I came here and met so many issues with all the different art forms, and just trying to see how best we can save something, right? So I just find that we're too relaxed with what's happening in the extra regional societies. I mean, knowing that Virginia has this entire pan fest, and I kudos to them, right? And for what they're doing. I mean, there are people doing amazing things all over the world. There's Birch Creek,
Yeah.
Birch Creek, putting on this amazing summer program. I mean, all of these universities are putting on these amazing concerts, bringing in all of these brilliant minds in the steel pan art form, not just for them to play and the university to make a dollar, but to really expose people, the musicians within the art form, to all of a different side of the instrument, a more higher level side of the instrument. So, I mean, we can now start looking at building on top of these people, the Len Bougdishafts of the world. I mean, you've experienced it, so this is what's possible, and we need to now start looking at moving ahead from there. People like Andy Akio, and so just doing so much different things. I was explaining to some of the people here. I was like, "Do you guys realize there's pan on Tiny Desk?" Because I absolutely love Tiny Desk, right? I said, "Do you realize there's steel pan on Tiny Desk?" They're like, "No, you have to be crazy. You mean Tiny Desk you're talking about? No, NPS?" I said, "Yes. Go on there. You see, Jonathan Scales is on Tiny Desk, and that's a huge thing for me, right? Because you look at all these big names coming across Tiny Desk, and Jonathan Scales, he didn't just go on to Tiny Desk during COVID. He was on, before. And what I'm saying is, these, as far as we go to Japan, went to Japan in 2019, and there are people, when we got there, well, we didn't source the instruments. We just told them what we needed. And when we got there are these instruments with the contracts in the instrument, and, pan sticks, how to key the instrument, how to set up this. I mean, not that we needed it, but there are people out there that are renting instruments to visitors that are coming in. There are people out there that are still innovating in terms of stands, the stands that manage sells. I'm just saying, I think that here we're so focused on the wrong things, right? Our focus is placed in the wrong area, and we should be focused on development. One of the things that irks me for the Caribbean is still arguing about who first created the pan. At this point, who cares? Like, at this point, who cares? In my view, I mean, yes, understand and appreciate the history,
Right.
that continuous fight and argue over who first, I think that should not be the focus at this point in
Yeah, we
time.
should focus on the future and just like
Where
you
are we going? Because here's what I mean. They always speak about the Japanese, right, and the Swiss.
I know, I
Right?
know, I
You know,
know.
the
Stop.
here in Antigua, the Japanese people are running away with our thing. They're running away with our
I
thing.
know.
I'm
And I
like,
happen to be Japanese.
I'm like, what? These people are just trying to see. You know, they've learned about the instrument. They love the instrument, and they're just trying to see where they can take it. That is all. That is all. And we're here focusing about who first. Like we will literally have argument because I don't know if you know Josh, but Antigua has an extremely important role in the development of steel pan globally.
Talk to me like I'm two. Assume I know nothing.
Right? So Antigua has, well, I was going to repeat the same statement, but we do have an extremely important role in the development of steel pan and steel pan music globally. Right? Now, in 1949, Hell's Gate Steel Orchestra was chosen to represent the Caribbean at the World Festival of Britain. I think it was in 1951, 1952. Right? That is when it was slated to. At that time, TASPA was not formed.
Right, TASPA was in 51.
Right. No, at the time, because I actually went to the archive in Trinidad and I found an article in the Sunday Guardian that said it just spoke about how progressive Antiguan steel bands were at that time, and it was entitled, I think, "Steel Bands in Antigua equals or surpasses that of Trinidad steel band." And this is a Trinidad newspaper. This is not an Antigua steel newspaper.
Those are fighting words in Trinidad. I mean, good lord.
Right? So you know the Antigua would have I mean, in the early years, our instruments sounded different. There are rumors that it sounded better. Dr. Eric Williams at the time, and I think Hell's Gate and Brute Force were in Trinidad I think it was in the 50s or so. Yeah, I think it was somewhere around that time. If not 50s, early 60s, but I think it was in the 50s. It had to have been in the 50s. And, you know, he would have said to Desperados at the time, you know, you guys need to get your drums to sound like Antigua drums. Like spent a long, long time. Taspo was apparently formed because they didn't have one single group that was good enough to represent. And they went around and found all of the best from all of the bands and formed this group.
Yeah, in addition to because of all the violence and the
right,
yeah.
try to bring it together. Because we actually had some conversations about this in our steel pan history and development class while I was at UE as well. And it's just, you know, amazing to see like some of the first recordings that you've heard, even in some of the cartoons like Tom and Jerry, were from Antiguan recordings done by the Smithsonian and Emery Cook, right? And you can still find that album selling for premium dollar. I think they're like $21 for the album right now. But I have all of those albums. But these albums were done a long time ago. I think it was in the middle 50s or so, 55, 56. I have to go and double check the dates. But those are some of the earliest recordings of steel pan. And steel pan was, I mean, these people were recording with like Dot Evans, and I think Dot Evans is from Trinidad, if I'm not mistaken, right? Singing jazz standards in the middle 50s, right? And performing, you know, Autumn Leaves and these kind of stuff in the middle 50s. You know, they would have been able to, here in Antigua, would have experienced Vere Griffith, the same Lieutenant Vere Griffith that would have worked with Tasper back in the early 50s as well. So there's so many things, and you know, there are other rumors about who first put rubber on bass sticks and that kind of stuff. I don't necessarily need to get into that.
Right.
I
But
just keep
something
trying
I thought, you know, Aisha was telling me that the first competition, steel band competition, happened in 49, which is like way before, like, you know,
yeah,
Trinidad Panorama, you know, in 63. And it's like, whoa,
yeah,
you know, yeah, so much was happening in Antigua. And I wish, you know, we knew more about it, or like, you know, there's more like documents on steel pan in Antigua and Barbuda. Yeah.
Yeah, Con, I'm wondering how many steel bands are there on the islands of Antigua and Barbuda?
In terms of community groups, I think right now active about 10.
Okay.
Right?
And that includes like panorama bands, or that's
Yeah,
separate?
but I'm actually talking about the panorama
Got
bands.
it. Okay. All right.
So those are the ones that are. I mean, there are other groups, smaller groups, you know, 5, 7, maybe up to 10, that do like the hotel circuits and you know tours and things like that. But in terms of community bands, about 10 of them, and which is weird because in all the way up to the 60s, up to the 70s, there was literally a band almost on every corner. Every every band had their own tuner and builder,
Yeah,
right?
Aisha mentioned that as well. Yeah.
And right now on Island, we only have one and a half, you know, tuner because the other guy is older, you know, and he's really getting down. You can tell, you know. I mean, he spends forever tuning one pan, um, you know. So it just, you know, we are still focused on the wrong thing, right?
Well,
We're still,
the
you
th-
know, one of the reasons why we would have seen that downfall in that 70s 80s period is because at that time a lot of bands were outsourcing everything, so they would get a lot of players, they would get the arranger, the tuner, builder, and money's dried up, right? It was a time where, you know, sponsors weren't able to give as much, and because of that, you know, a lot of things, and then a lot of people migrated as well, right? A lot of influential people would have migrated. So, you know, there's some issues. What I've been trying to well, conversations that we've been having now with a lot of the people on the island is how do we move forward, right? Okay, I don't care that Hell's Gate would have won 21 championships, right? I don't care that the next band that has championships is 13. You know, so you're looking at what, 8 championships away. Or I don't care that, you know, this band would have represented at the Super Bowl, because we have a band here that played in the Super Bowl in 72, in the 70s, the early 70s. Yeah, right. It's a halftime show actually.
Wow.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Um,
Yeah.
so you know, I couldn't. When I say I don't care, I don't want you to get me wrong. Those things are useful information, and it also, you know, just gives us some perspective as to what used to happen, how bands would have grown, and what was happening at that point in time. At this point in time, let us try to see how we can first start documenting our history, because a lot of the people who knows are now dying out, and as you know, much of it just hasn't been written down. Outside of documenting that, how do we move forward? How do we start growing our art form holistically, right? So, not just players, but arrangers, tuners, builders. How can we start doing more music, more content for the art form? I mean, is it that when Len Bookty Sharp, Ray Holman, and the others passed away, we stopped getting original music for the instrument? That should not be the case. You know, I didn't call Liam's name because Liam is like 30 years old, so he has a long way to go.
God willing, Liam will be here for a while.
Yeah, but you know, do we stop getting those, you know, those classic, simple steel band tunes that we use all the time, you know, for concerts and for shows and that kind of stuff? No, I mean, how can we continue writing for the instruments? How can we start transcribing more of the panorama tunes that are not scored out so that more people can get to enjoy them? When I look at recordings here in Antigua and Barbuda, they're horrible. Listen, you listen to Antigua Panorama, you go on YouTube, and I can guarantee you, you're going to be like, what kind of school band is playing music here? And in reality, that is not the case. Like when you listen to these bands, you know, you actually, it sounds totally different from on the recording. How can we start capturing these recordings, not just for resale, but, and this is the part that irks me, because most people just think about, oh, you know, we're going to try to get a good recording so that this particular band can win the competition. That is not the case at all. We need to get these good recordings so we can now start um, analyzing,
Yeah.
right? Transcribing, analyzing the music of some of the people who would have gone before. I have never heard a panorama tune earlier than 1991 in Antigua. And in the 90s, I've probably only heard two or three. The earliest recordings before that would have been 2003, 2004. So what happened to all of these steel pan competitions that happened all the way back in 1949? I don't
Mhm.
know. Yes, recordings would have been limited. Well, in terms of equipment, would have been limited back then. But what happened in the 60s?
Right, exactly.
That they had so many glory days, right?
Yeah.
And at that time, they were actually capturing more because it was so new, right? Steel bands used to perform 2 tunes at the Panorama.
Wow.
Yes, in Antigua, our panorama is a 2 tune panorama, I think all the way up until maybe the 80s or so. It's two
Huh.
tunes. You would play a classical. These people used to play Rhapsody in Blue for George Gershwin, The Messiah, all of those major classical works, they used
Mhm.
to play them. That's
Wow.
their first tune, and then their tune of choice is a local calypso.
Ah,
The 2 tune competition, and we can't get to hear it.
that's unique. Yeah. So that's something unique to like Antigua, pan
Yeah,
scene.
yeah.
Well,
So,
Yeah.
and the publishing thing. I mean, this has been the thorn in my butt ever since I got hip to the scene in New York and the Brooklyn panoramas. And Kendall Williams was the first person to really sort of get me injected into that scene. And then for 10 years, there were 10 to 12 panoramas, everything from Devon Stewart to Mark Brooks, Odie Franklin, Kendall, like Amon Pascal, like a bunch of folks would arrange it, and then they just disappear. And then the next year would go by. 12 tunes get written from scratch and then disappear. The only panorama out of Brooklyn, the only Rangers panorama, there's two that have been played by any other institution other than the band it was written for and arranged for, is NYU, and it's Mark Brooks and Kendall Williams. And that was after like me being like, we got to write this down so NYU can play it. This is an amazing panorama. And it's like, it's not that hard. Like you gotta write it down. And then what happens? And that's not true. And University of Akron played Ophelan.
Yes, they did. Yes.
And it's like, just in Brooklyn alone, there's 15, and I kind of hate the word arranger, even though I know what it means, but it's like they're composers who are writing beautiful music, and it just disappears. And it's like if Beethoven's an arranger, Mahler was an arranger. He took folk songs and different, Bartok arranged Hungarian folk songs, but they were written down, and that's why folks now 200 years later can play it. I want folks 200 years from now to just go to a website and be like, oh, cool, Cordice from 2009 Hell's Gate. What'd they play that year? Oh man, that arrangement's awesome. I'd love to play that with my band. Click, click, click. Next thing you know, you get a video from some band in Missouri, and you're like, you're playing it all wrong, but at least you're playing it. That's awesome, And then that's what Mozart did. His music gets picked up by somebody else, and he comes in and is like, that's all wrong. And then 300 years later, here we are. That writing it down. That to me, when we talk about moving things forward, if the Ministry of Culture in every country could just give like $100,000 to be like, we are going for the next 20 years. This is our moonshot. We're publishing every piece that was arranged for every panorama this year. Like, we're going to hire transcribers. We're going to hire people who can do engraving, who know Sibelius and Finale really well. And just put all this stuff through the wood chipper so that we can get it out to other people to play it. Because that's where I see the most work going with the most amount of waste. At the end. Right. Waste is maybe the wrong word, but it's like, it is a waste, kind of, to do all that work, and then nobody else ever gets to even sometimes even know that it happened.
Right.
Other than getting there from some YouTube algorithm. But if this music is up on a website, right next to John Williams, right next to anything else you want to play, then I feel like that's where the conversations start. And again, that takes decades, but it's not going to happen tonight. But anyway, that's where my head's been at that. As you're talking about this stuff, it's like, that's, man. I mean, it's why when, Cliff had some of his charts published, but not all of them. Why? that bums me out, and he's gone now, and we can't, it's harder to get that stuff back now. And I understand Cliff was doing a lot of other things. It's not like he wasted his time, but to me, that's the sort of biggest, that's the artery that's bleeding the most right now in the U.S. is that most U.S. bands program, unless you have a Trinidadian in your midst or somebody from the Caribbean in your midst, most bands are programming old Tom Miller charts from our boys from 20, 30 years ago, which are not bad, but it's 20 years ago. There's all this new stuff happening. And anyway, that's my soapbox, but
yeah, I do agree that, music definitely need to be, transcribed so they can be properly archived. And, so that's another reason to archive. So, they can be revisited to analyze or perform. But yeah. I mean, just invite me. I'll just do it for free for you, Khan. Well, you can write it, but like for other steel bands in Antigua.
I actually write all of my arrangements. So.
Yeah. So I figure like you're fine. Zara's fine, but yeah.
Actually, I'm trying to put them out now because it's been. I celebrated 2019. We celebrated a 10-year anniversary. So the idea was to put out all 10 of them in 2020, and then COVID came. Yeah. And I got more busy than I was prior to COVID. Crazy, right?
I know, right? It feels like you should have had more time, but it's like, no, I'm spending all your time on Zoom. Well, hey, Khan, this has been amazing, and I'm really grateful for your time, and I'm grateful to sort of get to meet you for the first time and chat. Larry, every time I talk to Larry, he's just like, if you say anything mean to Cordice, I'm gonna kill you. And I was like, why would I say anything mean to Cordice? Like you're
I
clearly
actually called him by mistake. Last week.
you
I
did.
was trying to call another Larry. Yeah, because I still have his number. So I probably should give him a call too.
Well, you are loved and respected by everybody who met you, and so I came into this assuming it was going to be the same way, and I'm absolutely
I
grateful
had an
for your time.
amazing time at Akron, man. Trust me.
But let
Yeah,
me.
this little boy did change my life at Akron. He
That's
didn't even know.
it's my that's my alum. That's my undergrad, and so that's where I met Cliff. That's where I was in when you were talking about Bugsy practicing, like people paying him to practice. I picked him up at the airport, and he told me a story on his way. But he's like, you know how I practice? I was like, no. And he's like, well, I was in jail, and I had to figure out how to practice. And I was like, what? And this is like 5 minutes into meeting Bugsy, and he's like, each hand is a double second. I was like, okay. And he's like, G, high G, or middle G, E flat, B. And I was like, okay. And he's like, C sharp, A, F. He's like, so when I'm doing this, he's like, he's playing all, and then the opposite on the left hand. He's like, so I had to sit. He was like, I was in my cell, and I didn't dig further as to why he was in jail, but he was just like, this is how I practice, so I can go like A flat major, A major. And so he's going through all this thing, and it's like that seemed totally lunatic to me at that moment, but it doesn't. Knowing what I know about Bugsy now, it's like it doesn't surprise me that he would figure out a way to keep raging on his double seconds, even if he was off of them. So, but Akron is where that's Liam or Bugsy and Cliff and all those folks were exposed to me there, and I was exposed to them, and it changed my life. So, on that note,
I'm telling you, sorry.
No, go ahead.
No, I was just saying. I mean, going to NIU was definitely a life changing experience for me. Like meeting Liam and Cliff and Yuko. I mean, as I said, I was telling you earlier about that experience. Just meeting them was just always encouraging. Always trying to see if he can push you better. I mean, Cliff sometimes give you some rough talks, but it's always with good intentions. Yeah, I miss him dearly. Dearly.
Loved you so much.
Most of the ones I got from Cliff were at the Junction Eat. That's where
the junction.
He always paid, but that's if I had a hard chat with Cliff, it was usually at the Junction Eat.
Yeah.
Yuko, anything?
I don't know, Yuko.
Go ahead.
Yuko, do you remember the place that we went this first day I was in Illinois?
A restaurant or like
A restaurant, yeah.
Oh, I don't know. A junction or
So no, we were at over in Sycamore. It's a breakfast place.
Egg Haven?
Egg Haven, right? Just have a very joke to give you. Among a lot of other jokes, but I'll give you this one.
Okay.
So I've never been. The first time I went to the U.S. was when I went to NIU. I've never been to the U.S. prior, right? And I've been all over, right? I've been all over the Caribbean, but I've never been to the U.S. I get to the U.S. I mean, outside, the cold confused me. Sorry to say.
The cold?
We were at the cold, right?
Yeah.
So I've never been in the cold. I went to, we got to the airport. I had my winter jacket with me, and in the baggage claim was warm. So Cliff came inside and he said, can put on your jacket. I said, I don't need to put on my jacket. It's warm. Right? She's like, no, you need to put on your jacket. We're going outside. I said, the place is warm. I don't need to put on my jacket. Anyway, he cussed a bad word, put on my jacket. I put on my jacket and I get to the door, and I felt like somebody slapped me with a bag of ice. At that time, I'm not thinking that they would have heaters on inside, and because outside is cold, as confusing. Anyway, I go to Egg Haven and the next day, and they have hash browns on the menu. I've never experienced. I thought it was hash brownies, right? I thought it was wheat brownies. I was like, these people are selling wheat brownies at 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock in the morning. So Cliff asked me if I want them. I was like, no, I'm good. He's like, you don't eat them. I love them, That's what Cliff was saying. I said, no, I can't believe you eat wheat brownies at 8 o'clock in the morning. It's like, wheat brownies? These aren't wheat brownies. These are potato. Never had it. So,
well,
it was something else.
Well, Con, this has been awesome. Thank you so much for your time. And I just want to put in just a sort of a request, and I think on behalf of myself and Yuko, that now that you're in the position of having students and you're in the Ministry of Culture, like if there are any students like yourself that you see that want to come and study in the U.S., obviously NIU is a place to send them. But NYU has we have a degree program, a pan-focused degree program that Kendall is running, starting in the fall. So go to NIU first, just out of loyalty. But if there's another student that you have, if anybody feels like coming and studying in New York would be a thing,
it's
do not
good.
hesitate.
It's good to open those options. Because what happened is, I don't know the program so much. I know I follow you, Josh, so I know some of the things that you guys would have been doing at NYU. But it's an option for those people who maybe have family in that New York area, right? That so that opens a different possibility, for them. So that's an option. I'm happy that is something. So I'll definitely pitch that idea to those who are willing as well.
It's we have a student,
and if they don't like it, they can just transfer to NIU. Anyway.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
No, you're not going to get any argument from me on that front. I will never argue with somebody who wants to study at NIU. But it has been nice. It's been one of the things at that program that I felt a real being so close to like one of the largest Caribbean populations in the world. And running a steel band there that doesn't deal with culture and steel pan as a real focus would be a real disservice. So anyway, it's been slow going and slow building it, but it's I think it would be a good home if you have any students who want to come to a place and study classical percussion, but also feel like, oh yeah, I know these people, I know what this is like. I'm not alone here. You know what I mean?
Right.
And it's
New York City sounds pretty good to me.
Well, and it's
to DeKalb, New York City.
Maybe just a little warmer in the summer than DeKalb.
Maybe
a little.
Hey, listen, I would not change DeKalb for the world, man. Like I would live in DeKalb.
Yeah,
If I get offered a job, I would live in DeKalb. Trust me. I just like. I like that it's close enough to the city. That if I need to go to the city, I can just drive a few minutes to get to the city. But it's far enough, away from the crime and the busyness.
Right, that is true.
Have friends over and we chill. I like DeKalb. I've been dreaming about going back to live maybe someday.
Yes, please come back, Con. Bring your family.
If I get offered a job, you never know.
There you go. Yeah, you never know. We may be extending it. Who knows?
Liam may have his knees broken by a strange white man with a beard, and then you'll have a job. Well, hey, we'll let you go. Thank you, Yuko. Again, obviously, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, thank
is
you.
always great, and thank you for introducing me to Con. And Con, thank you for your time. Please stay healthy and safe, and I hope that we can cross paths and tip up a rum and coke at some point here in the future and play together.
Sure.
Really fun.
Yep.
Yeah, definitely. Sooner rather than later.
Please. Alrighty, take it easy. Good to chat with you both.
You too.
All right, have a good one.
Okay,
Bye-bye.
take care. Bye.
And it has a second parcel here, and it's not ringing enough for me.